Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
And welcome to this week's edition of Back to the Father here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. We are in the KTH 910 AM studio of Guadalupe Radio Network and very happy to share this show with a few other platforms. I understand Sissel can give us an exact update, but things are moving fast and things are changing within the GRN in a good way, and we are doing new things, and we have a very, very good engineering team that continue to improve the look and the studio and a lot of things, cameras. And so you're going to continue to see updates on this show and also other shows across the GRN in the coming weeks. And so welcome. This show is focused on the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas and the Summa Theologia. Sometimes we focus exclusively on a particular topic of St. Thomas Aquinas, and sometimes, like today, we depart a little bit. We're always in our mind thinking about what St. Thomas Aquinas teaches. But today on the show, we are going to talk about human nature and political philosophy. And I'm going to highlight the political philosophies of 5 different famous philosophers, okay? And I'll tell you more about who they are. And this is something that is very practical because politics, whether we like it or not, affects all of us. And we all live under some kind of a political structure, even in our homes and in our jobs and in our society, in our nation, our world. Politics is inescapable. And so what's the best form of politics? What's the best form of government? Okay, that's the kind of thing we're going to talk about today. And also, it's going to be kind of fun because, of course, I have Sissel and William, who has returned again. We're so happy to have William Kirkendall with us. And Sissel, of course, she doesn't have a choice. I mean, she's here, but we're always glad to have her. So welcome to both of you. How y'all doing?
Doing great.
Doing
this
well.
is really trippy. I'm just like looking at all the streaming stuff that's going on and how many platforms we're on and stuff like that. It's quite fun.
Yeah. So how many platforms are we on exactly? You don't even know. Too many to count?
No, the newest one, though, for sure, is that we're on Instagram. And it's funny, too, because it's a vertical video. So we're like stacked on top of each other as opposed to being like, horizontal.
So it's a different look on different platforms.
Oh, it's a different look. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's pretty fun. It's pretty awesome. So hello to everyone on Instagram who's watching us live. This is the first time you're getting to experience Back to the Father. So congratulations.
Wow. What a lucky day.
Day.
All right, so here's what we're going to do. If you're new to the show, I already kind of explained what the whole purpose of the show is. It's a conversation, okay? We try not to make it too deep, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you during the course of the show today to 5 different political philosophers. And I want you all, and I really want William, and William has a real background. In fact, you're going to major in political philosophy, right? When you get to UD, is that right?
That's my plan.
So this is like right up your alley.
Yes,
I mean, this is it. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. You like talking about it?
I do. Yes. It's interesting. I mean, yeah. It's a little bit complicated. Like what? Because when you're kind of like you're learning and things like that, so you don't exactly know what is the best form of government. You're still trying to figure it out, but as you learn about it, it definitely gets more interesting, and you start to form opinions and views about it. So I do like it.
So what I want you and Sissel to do, and everybody out there, if you want to play along from the comfort of your home or office, wherever you are, is when I introduce these 5 political philosophers today, I want you to tell me under which of these political philosophers, if they were in control of the government, would you most like to live under?
Oh boy!
Okay, or even rank them. Okay, from best to worst. Okay, so you might want to have a little piece of paper out, and if you want to jot some notes down.
This now, Dave, we're like I'm live.
Okay. Here's a piece of paper.
Oh yay!
All right, do you want one, William?
I'll take one.
Okay, you can just keep it in your head. Okay, so this is gonna be a lot of fun. We're gonna do that, and I'm hoping with all these platforms we have out there, if 3, 4, 5 of you will do this as well. Rank the political philosophers and say, I would most like to live under this guy's rule or this guy's philosophy, and I would least like to live under. And I don't think it's just like a slam dunk that one of them is just clearly the worst. And I'm going to try to present them somewhat objectively, so it's not I'm not showing my bias in it.
That'll be the real test.
So I certainly have my opinions, of course, like anybody else. So, all right, so let's get started. And what do I first want to do? And we have this cool, PowerPoint presentation, and I have on the first slide a picture of a man and a picture of a woman. Okay, now this is just merely to say that we first of all want to talk about human nature, okay, because it's hard to talk about philosophy. It's hard to talk about any kind of philosophy, political philosophy, if you don't understand what is a human being. And of course, you'd get different answers for that from different people, and not everybody agrees in exactly what the human being is, or what our destiny or our telos is, or what's the purpose. Do we have a soul? Do we, I think you have to be pretty crazy to say we don't have a body. Although I think George Berkeley would say that he didn't believe in matter. So there are philosophers that didn't believe in matter, which is kind of crazy. But
well, we're discovering that the PowerPoint does not work super well on Instagram, so I'd like to apologize to everyone on Instagram.
Really? So they're not going to see it.
Well, they're going to see it very awkwardly. We're doing the there we go. That's a little. We might be able to fix it a little bit.
What about the other platforms? They can see it okay.
Are just fine. It's because of the way that Instagram is set up. Some of the images might just be cut off a little bit for you, but we're trying our best over here.
Yeah. Now here's the thing. We're the three of us, and I'm guessing most people watching this program right now are probably in kind of like-mindedness. We kind of agree on what the human person is, but in the general public, there isn't a lot of common ground on this. Okay, so I'm going to put one of y'all on the spot. I'll put Sis on the spot. Okay, what is a human person? What makes us unique? And how would you, somebody drops down from another planet and they've never seen a human before? Right. How would you describe a human person, and what's unique about them?
So humans are a body-soul composite, and we are made in the image and likeness of God. Okay. And so we have I know that we've talked about this before, because you said that like animals do have a soul, but it's like different. Yeah. We have I guess a unique soul, and that was made in the likeness of God. Is that what makes it unique? Or
as a trace of God.
As a trace of God.
Yeah. Not made in the image and likeness. That would be only angels and humans.
And we're only we're only like human when it's like the body and soul together, right?
Yeah. All right.
That's my explanation.
I like that. Now, somebody getting that explanation that doesn't have any knowledge of anything you're talking about would say, okay, you're made in the image and likeness of God. Okay, so if the human being is made in the image and likeness of God, well, what's God? So it kind of begs the question that if we're made in the image and likeness, like if I said something is made in the image and likeness of Bloody Boo, you'd say, well, what's Bloody Boo? Because I'd have to know that in order to know what you are, right? So obviously, God, as we know it, the attributes that Aquinas talks about in questions 3 through 11 of the Summa is that he is simple, he's perfect, he's good, infinite, immutable, eternal, and one. All right, so if you look at those 7 attributes, you got to come away thinking, wow, that's a pretty amazing being there, perfect, good, simple. It's like all the things we want to be. I mean, we all want to be good. We want to be perfect. I think we'd like to be infinite. That'd be kind of cool, wouldn't it? So the fact that we're made in the image and likeness of God is pretty amazing. So now the next slide, I'm going to introduce our 5 political philosophers. All right, so here they are on the screen, and these are the order we'll be talking about them. That I showed this in my class the other day, and
our PowerPoint has the man and woman still on it.
Oh, really?
Okay.
That's so it's
they're
coming.
Not philosophers.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
They're not. Yeah, they're not. No. They're still on there because
you intended that. Okay.
Yeah, no, I intended
like,
because
there are more people.
I did not elevate these 2 people to the rank of political philosophers. But what I'm saying is that these political philosophers are impacting human beings, right? They're dealing, because if there are no human beings, we wouldn't have political philosophy, because you don't have political philosophy for ants or gerbils or aardvarks. It all has to do with the human person. So no, that was intentional. All right, so the top left is Niccolo Machiavelli. Okay, so one of my students in class the other day said, he looks like Curious George. And I was like, he kind of does look like Curious George. All right, so Niccolo Machiavelli, to his right is John Locke. Okay, he's the second one we're going to talk about. And then you go kind of down to the right, the one that's kind of in darkness, looks like he's in a dark closet, and all you see is his head. That's Thomas Hobbes. Okay, and then I'm going to ignore the 2 generic, model humans that are on there because they're not political philosophers. Then if you go bottom left, that is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Guess what country he's from? Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the Frenchman. And then on the far right is, of course, Karl Marx. All right. So those are the 5. So let me ask you and anybody else out there that wants to answer, how much familiarity do you have with these 5 men? Okay. Could you tell me anything about Niccolo Machiavelli, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, or Karl Marx? Yeah, William, you could.
I could tell you, I don't know too much about Machiavelli. I don't know too much about Rousseau, but I could tell you a little bit about John Locke, Marx, and the other one, what was his name?
Rousseau?
Rousseau.
Yeah.
No, Hobbes. I meant to say Hobbes, yeah.
Hobbes is, I think very few people know about Hobbes.
Yeah.
But he's really interesting.
Yeah.
In a bad way.
Yes, yeah.
I told you.
Spoiler. Dang,
I told you. Okay, I'm
opinion.
sorry.
Well, I know who I'm putting as number 5. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't know my rankings. I'll do it as well, okay? So let me know if there's any comments from anybody.
I gotta write these guys' names down, so I can like note what philosophy goes with which person.
Okay, so if you don't mind, if I see a comment, I'm gonna go ahead and mention it, okay? Because I know, Sissel, you're trying to look at like.
Forrest. Are you talking about Forrest?
Yeah,
comments?
Forrest.
Yes.
He likes the monarchy.
Yes. So he's already decided.
Are you a monarchist, William? Do you?
I'm sympathetic to something that would be similar to an elected monarchy. Yes.
All right. So and Forrest says Machiavelli wrote The Prince based on Alexander VI. Okay. So Forrest clearly has some background here. So let's get right to it. And again, I think you're going to find this interesting. I presented a PowerPoint to my class that I teach. I teach a high school class, and I don't want to go over everything because it would take too long. So what I've done is I've highlighted some of the main points. And so if you want to read it all, you can. But if you go to the first slide, we're going to start with Machiavelli. Okay, now the first thing you should know is that Machiavelli has become an adjective. Okay, so if somebody were to say, my economics teacher in college was very Machiavellian, okay, that actually means something. Nobody ever says he was Hobbesian, okay, because that
would be fun, though.
But Machiavellian has become an adjective, okay. I bet you, So Italian political realist, okay. Now a realist just means that it's almost as opposed to a metaphysic kind of guy who's, he's looking at the situation, very practical. Okay, what works? What do I need to do to achieve my ends? Right. Now you got to look also that when he lived. Okay, he was early on. He was in the time of the Protestant Reformation. In fact, he was before that, which should make you think, well, did he have an influence on the Protestant Reformation? And I think he certainly did.
Probably, yeah.
Because the Protestant Reformation happened just about 10 years before he died. So he was born in the 15th century, and this is the time of guys like John Hus and John Wycliffe, and these were kind of the forerunners of the Protestant Reformation. So I don't Martin Luther he officially started the Protestant Reformation, but it was already brewing long before Martin Luther. So and also taking consideration before René Descartes, before Hobbes, before Bacon, before Galileo Galilei, and before Isaac Newton. Okay, so he's early, okay? So just kind of keep that in mind because I always think you have to look at the historical perspective about this. Next slide, as Forrest has already said, his most famous book is called The Prince. And if there's one thing that would kind of define The Prince, well, first of all, he's not writing for the average person. He's not writing for you and me. He's writing for princes. He's writing for leaders, okay? So how does a leader lead his people, okay? And if you want to summarize it in one sentence, it's the ends justify the means, okay? So basically, you do what you need to do to have a good result, and don't worry about whether what you're doing is
morally correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Or like, and he wouldn't even call it morally correct. He's like, the morals don't matter. Okay. So you say, oh, that was immoral, what you did. He'd say, I don't care. Did it end up with a good result or did it not? All right. A rejection of traditional Christian ideal of a virtuous life. Okay. He wasn't about virtue. He wasn't about, what's right and what's wrong. He's results oriented. And that's why I think, you might some people may say, I used to work for a boss that was like that. All he or she cared about were the results, and we could cheat or we could swindle or we could be dishonest. It doesn't matter. At the end of the month, did we have a good goals report? And that's all that matters. Okay. That's Machiavellian. All right. So you're probably thinking, okay, where's this guy going to show up in my list?
I know, because we also have Marx on here, so I'm just very curious to how this is gonna.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm saying it's not a slam dunk. Okay. All right. Next slide. This is a quote from the Prince. He says, "A man who wishes to make a vocation of being good at all times will come to ruin among so many who are not good." All right. So now he's starting to say, yeah, you can try to be good, but the people around you are not good. And so, yeah, it's a little, kind of dreamy to think that you're going to be all good and everybody else is going to be good because they're not good. Okay. And here's a quote, and this tells you what he thought about human nature. He said, "People are ungrateful, fickle, simulators and deceivers, avoiders of danger, greedy for gain." Okay, there's his idea of human nature. All right, so that's Niccolo Machiavelli. Next slide. What I have highlighted there: do whatever is necessary in the face of unpredictable fortune in order to achieve the desired end. There was a notion, and I think it goes back to like a Greek goddess, Fortuna. Have you ever heard of her? Where fortune kind of moved along, and it was kind of a deterministic kind of thing where things are going to happen, and you need to adapt, and you need to do what you need to do to adjust to circumstances in your life in order that you can try to get the best end as much as possible. Traditional Christian morality he thought was weak and unsuitable and impractical for an effective leader. So he was not advising princes to be ethical, to follow Christian. Now he's in Italy, okay, so he's living in a Christian world, but he totally abandoned Christian morality. All right, so next slide talks about legacy, and this will tell you a lot about Niccolo Machiavelli. Fascist Italian leader Benito Mussolini described The Prince, the book, as the statesman's supreme guide. Okay. So that should tell you something, okay? Joseph Stalin was said to have read and reread The Prince by Machiavelli and apply his tactics to his dictatorial reign over the Soviet Union. Okay, Stalin was, I believe, the second leader of the Soviet Union. Lenin was first, and then Stalin. That's right. And we'll get to more of the things that happened. Okay, so that's the end of Niccolo Machiavelli. So any comments, any questions, anything from the folks out there listening, or you impressed with Machiavelli?
He exists. He
exists. No, I mean, that's not really. That's not an impressive philosophy. I mean, it is kind of what we're dealing with. You know what I mean? Like it's we definitely have it with us right now, because like we always say, political philosophers do impact the culture and impact the age we live in, for sure. So I took a couple notes. I'm definitely seeing this kind of play out in today's life. So he's definitely one of those philosophers that influenced what we've got today.
Yeah,
I feel like.
And if the end justify the means, you could look even at something like what happened in 2020, where the government was trying. Let's just assume they had a good intention. They wanted as few people to die as possible of COVID. So what do? They do these draconian Machiavellian measures and locking people in their house. People being forced to get vaccinated. And so they're saying, in essence, hey, the means don't matter. I want the end. The end is what matters, and what we have to do to get there. Again, that's what I think is a real life example of a Machiavellian type of thing, where you're not looking at the ways that you're getting to the end. You're getting to the end results, and regardless of whether it's moral or not.
Right.
All right. So okay. So now, if you guys are satisfied with Machiavelli, we'll move on to the next, and this will probably be the least controversial of all of them. And the main reason that John Locke, if you go to the next slide, is the least controversial is that I think we're living largely under a very Lockean type of government right now, okay? And for reasons that we'll explain. This isn't going to be quite as shocking as some of the other ones, and it's going to be almost boring, but at the time he wrote this, it wasn't boring. This was kind of revolutionary. Okay, so Locke is interesting because he not only was a political philosopher, he also was
wasn't he a figure in the Protestant Reformation? No, did he not? Or am I thinking of the wrong guy?
I think you might be thinking of somebody else.
Okay, never mind. So, there's another John, not John Calvin, but like there's other guys.
Well, there's a John Huss, there's a John Calvin. But no, he's not
different guy.
Now he would have lived about 100 years after the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. But if you look in a moment, they say the 17th century was just like a horrible time to live. It was just like so many wars, so much death, so much like horrible stuff. And you see, he lived most of his life in the 17th century, died in 1704. He was, and I'm not going to get onto this because it has nothing to do with political philosophy directly, but he was the father of empiricism. Okay, so back then you had the rationalists like Descartes and Spinoza and Leibniz, and then you had the empiricists like Locke and Berkeley and Hume, and then Kant was the one that tried to bring it all together. So Locke started the modern emphasis on empiricism, but that's just we're not going to talk about that. Like, babe, you just did, okay, but we're not going to talk about it anymore.
Can I have a short definition of empiricism for anyone who's listening?
Oh yeah, thank you, good question. Empiricism would mean that we come to know things primarily through experience. Okay.
Through our senses.
Yeah, through our senses. Yeah, right. Through our senses, through experience, through this. And so he came up with this idea of the tabula rasa.
Yeah.
Which means that a person is born with a blank tablet. They know nothing. And then as they experience life, they're building up knowledge through experience. Okay, so a baby's never seen a dog. As soon as they see a dog, now that tablet has dog on it, but they never had it. Whereas Plato believed in innate knowledge. Remember, to Plato, learning is remembering, where everything was innate, okay, because Plato was a rationalist. And Descartes, the only thing that he came to the conclusion of, he totally discounted the senses. He said, I can't trust them. Okay, the senses cannot be trusted, and so he was a rationalist. But anyways, okay, that was. Maybe I wasn't going to talk about that, but
I'm
glad you asked. It wasn't short.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Okay, no, that's okay. So the 17th century was a time of war, revolution, and upheaval. Let's move on past that one. Next slide. His famous book on political philosophy was called Two Treatises on Government. Okay, now he argued, as did most of these guys we're talking about, against the divine right of kings. Okay, divine right of kings was very popular, like in the medieval ages, and that just meant that kings were there by divine right. And we obey the king because in obeying the king, we're obeying God. Okay, because God basically appointed the king. And so if you rebel against the king, it's basically tantamount to rebelling against God. And people like even Machiavelli are like, I don't think so. And Locke certainly did not agree that, okay? He thought that the people needed to be involved in establishing their government. Which today in our modern sensibility would be like, that's kind of how we are. We're in a democratic republic, right?
There is something interesting about that, because I was looking at Aquinas' Summa Theologia recently. I was revisiting, I believe it was something about his political philosophy. I think it was question 105 or something like that. And he said that in Aquinas' opinion, monarchy is the best form of government in principle, not necessarily in practice. He argued that I believe it was what the Greeks called the polity, the combination of the monarchy, the aristocracy, and the people coming together to form their government, kind of like what we had in America when the founders gave us this country. And I think that it's interesting because there was one sentence in Aquinas' question 105 where he said that the government the form of government doesn't necessarily matter so much. It's that the people still should have a say in who they elect. So even Aquinas, based off what I read in question 105, I believe it was, Aquinas isn't even against the people electing their government. He's against the idea of the people having. I guess he'd be against the idea of the people having too much power over the state, like communism. But he definitely said that the people do contribute to their government, and they definitely should be electing their leaders.
That would be interesting when we get to Rousseau, because I think that you're going to Thomas would have a lot of problems with Rousseau. So thank you, I appreciate that. All right, so people have certain duties to God, not to harm the body, property, or liberty of others, and also have the right to defend themselves and their property. Okay, so that sounds very American.
He was very much for the property rights stuff. Because I remember we debated a topic last year, and it was property rights versus the economic interest of the community, and everyone quoted Locke when they would take the affirmative side. So I remember that very well.
Yeah, right, exactly. So next slide. People should form a government in order that it can defend their natural rights. Okay, so this is an introduction to natural rights. Now, Aquinas, I think, would agree that we have natural rights, we have natural law. Now, this whole idea of a social contract is going to come up not only in Locke, but it's also going to come up in Rousseau. In fact, Rousseau's book was called The Social Contract. It's also going to come up when we learn about Thomas Hobbes here in a moment as well. And that just means that the people and the government are agreeing on something, okay? And maybe a little less so in Rousseau. But anyways, okay, a social contract sets up a contractual set of duties between the government and the people. The only legitimate government is the one that governs with the consent of those who are governed by it. Okay, this sounds very, very much like America. Why? Because America was influenced by Locke. Okay, it's not the other way around. It's not like Locke was reading the Constitution of America and did his philosophy. It's the other way around. Thomas Jefferson was reading Locke. These guys, John Adams was reading Locke, and that's where they came up with things like the U.S. Constitution. All right, so the legacy, the last slide here on Locke. His writings influenced Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose philosophy ignited the French Revolution in 1789. So before you start thinking, boy, let's canonize this guy, well, that's wonderful. Talk to the thousands of priests and sisters and nuns who were killed and in the French Revolution. His writings are also reflected in the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And so, again, we are very, very much indebted to John Locke if you like this country, okay? If you don't, well, then you're not indebted to him, okay? So, again, the least controversial probably from our American 21st century standpoint would be John Locke, okay? So keep an eye, keep a note on him. But now we're going to move on to the next guy, okay? Before we do, any questions on Locke, or is anybody making any comments or anything that we need to respond to?
Yeah, I do. I do have something. I don't. I don't know. I feel like there's definitely a very big disconnect from what the ancient philosophers and the medieval philosophers like Aristotle, Aquinas would have talked about in their philosophies or in their politics, because he's definitely against the whole absolute monarchy. And you go back, you look at Socrates, Plato, they all advocated for monarchies or aristocracies. They advocated for hierarchy in government, and that you needed a government in order to set standards within that society. That's definitely what they argued. Locke definitely went away from that philosophy very dramatically, to say that the people have the right to elect their government. And he a lot of what he bases his stuff on, just from studying him last year a lot in my government class, he was definitely very much for people's rights, very much for less government, small government, and if we do have a government, the people have the right to overthrow it if it becomes a tyranny.
I actually have that on there. I didn't highlight it, but it was on one of those slides.
I did see it.
I did see it. Yeah.
And I don't know if I'd be interested to see what Aquinas would say about that, because I'm not sure if Aquinas would entirely disagree with that thing about if the government becomes a tyranny, the people have the right to overthrow it. I mean, if Aquinas believed that the people do have some say in electing their leaders, I don't know if Aquinas would have a problem with that specifically. There are definitely problems, I think, with John Locke's philosophy basing too much on the rights of the people and less so on the hierarchy. And I mean, it's already a problem, and it raises red flags if you see philosophers earlier who are influencing people who supported the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution, or people who influenced later communism. It definitely raises some red flags, and there's definitely at least something wrong in their philosophy, if that's what's kind of
and the point is, I think we'll see after all this, is that there's really no perfect philosophical system, because we got free will, we got concupiscence, we got original sins, you got a whole bunch of wounded, broken people trying to form a government, and it's all more of a kind of a balance kind of thing.
It's never going to be perfect.
Yeah, it's never going to be perfect.
We also got a comment from Forrest. He was saying, back when you were talking about, or we didn't talk about the impressions from John Locke, but when we did talk about it, he said sensum defectui, which is the line from, oh gosh, what's the song? But it basically is reminding us of the defectiveness of our senses.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Why can't I remember? It's one of the songs. It's Tantum Ergo.
Oh, yeah. And that's Aquinas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
he wrote it. It's from the Corpus Christi liturgy, I think.
So he's just commenting that, and I was like, yep.
All right. Very good. All right. Well, thank you, Forrest. Appreciate the comments. All right. We move on now to our next and third philosopher, Thomas Hobbes. And if you're not familiar with Thomas Hobbes, I think you're going to find him really interesting. And I'm not going to show my cards about this.
Arguably got the best name.
Okay. So on the first slide here, like John Locke, he lived in the tumultuous and unstable 17th century, marked by war and religious strife. All right, so again, you can't disregard the fact that this guy lived in a time. In fact, the Parliament rose up against the King of England, I think at the time, but back then, and they beheaded him. And Thomas Hobbes was shocked because there was like a revolution, and he realized, wow, the people, rose up, and he came to the conclusion, okay, that's too much power. We need a more powerful leader, as you'll see in his philosophy here in a second. His most famous book is called Leviathan, okay, and it was named after the big sea monster from the Book of Job.
That's what I was sitting here going,
former Protestant is nodding. All right, so Leviathan, okay, the beast of Job, right? He was a scientific materialist, determinist view of human nature, didn't really think too highly of free will. It's interesting because a lot of these guys, people throughout their lives are like, are you really Christian? And Hobbes was like, yeah, I'm Christian. And they're like, are you just saying you're a Christian so that the church authorities don't, get really mad at you? And no, I'm not. So a lot of these guys are this way because there was a little bit more of a heavy-handedness by the church back then, where people were afraid to cross it. And so a lot of sincerity was doubted about some of these people. Let's just take him at his word, because we're not God. And I'll just say Thomas Hobbes never officially, I don't think, apostatized. I think he claimed to be a Christian his whole life. But anyways, we'll leave that between him and God. Okay, his philosophy in the next slide focused on what he called the state of nature. And he said, ungoverned natural man are in a state of war, every man against every other man. Men live in a continual state of fear with constant threat of violent death. All right. He said, Fear and I were born twins. Okay. He was fearful. He was a guy that was like, I don't trust people. People are bad. Kind of a little bit like what Machiavelli said before. Okay. Now, this is his most famous line. And this is, if you ever take a philosophy class, when you take one, William, and you learn about Hobbes, they always quote this line. He said, the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
Has he been hanging out with our friend Arthur
Schopenhauer? Well, he lived before Schopenhauer.
I was going to say, okay, then maybe Schopenhauer
a couple
was
centuries.
hanging out with him.
Well, okay, similarity, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, without a doubt. Okay, so now I've heard people say like, okay, you don't agree with Hobbes, right? Do you lock your door at night when you go to bed? Okay. Will you give your Social Security number out right now or will you give your credit card number? Why not? Because you don't trust people, right?
All right.
And so there's a little bit of Hobbesian in us because there is an element of badness in the world, okay? I mean, Yeah, like I said, why do most of us lock our doors at night? Every night before I go to bed, I check. Why? Because there's that element out there. People are at war. There's some bad stuff out there, right? So he's not all wrong. Okay, next slide. He says people naturally desire to get themselves out of this state of nature. In order to achieve security, they must be willing to give up a share of their natural rights in order to achieve the security. The solution is a social contract based on the establishment of what he called a Leviathan, a leader with absolute power and authority to whom all people submit. So the people choose to have a totalitarian leader who has absolute power over them. Okay, so it's kind of weird. Like, the guy didn't just assume the power; the people gave it to him.
Okay,
Okay,
they're like, we want you to take care of everything, kind of idea.
just keep us safe.
It seems similar. Yeah, it seems very similar to and I haven't read the whole book myself, but I've seen videos giving commentary on it. It sounds very similar to Aldous Huxley, Brave New World.
Oh, really?
Where
Okay.
the everyone's like under the totalitarian government and they don't really, they're kind of all enslaved and they don't really care.
Yeah.
They've kind of just given their power because they're addicted to their technology or to their other depraved things that they don't that they don't really care about what's going on, and they're under that totalitarian government. I imagine that those books, that George Orwell wrote and Aldous Huxley wrote, probably were based off of these earlier philosophers.
Without a doubt. Without a
Easily.
doubt. Yeah. So you ever thought, like, okay, in my neighborhood, I want to put armed guys with, machine guns on at every corner of the street. And if anybody comes and tries to steal something in the house, they just order to just kill them, okay? And what you'd have is security. You'd have safety. But at what cost? Okay, it's a little Machiavellian, okay? So there's some similarities between Hobbes and Machiavellian. Okay, the only way out of the state of nature is complete submission to a single absolute power. This is why I said at the beginning that the government has to, first of all, say, what do we believe about human nature? Okay, Thomas Aquinas says human nature is good. We're naturally virtuous, okay, but we're wounded. Okay, Hobbes didn't agree that. He thought people were horrible and they're constantly at war with each other. And if we didn't have laws, it's interesting because it's kind of true that, like, let's say a hurricane hits Miami and all of a sudden everything gets into chaos. What almost always happens? Looting, right? So as soon as the authority, like, because now the police are not able to get to the stores and everything's chaotic and the people kind of go nuts, right? And you see these videos of people running into stores, and as soon as there's a kind of a relaxation of the authority structure, people do almost come kind of Hobbesian.
Yeah.
They do kind of revert back. Why? Because there's no longer authority. What if they said tomorrow no one in the world is going to get a ticket, there's no police on the streets, you can do whatever you want? Do you think on 114 out here people would be like, like 130
That's literally
miles?
the plot of a movie, I'm pretty sure. Isn't it the Purge movies? Isn't that what the plot of
Oh,
it
is that what that's
that
about?
For 24 hours, you can do whatever. Maybe it's not the wrong movie. I don't know if it's a Purge.
You can do whatever you want.
You want no consequences.
Yeah.
for like
yeah.
24
Well,
hours.
Dostoevsky
And
said,
it wasn't a sunshine and butterfly situation.
Yeah,
my knowledge.
I'll think about that. That's a great. I didn't realize it was a premise of a movie,
I
but they
have
said,
not
okay,
seen
for,
the movie. I
for
just heard
24
about it.
hours you can do whatever you want, okay, and there's no consequences even after the fact. I think people would go nuts. I think people would be raping and pillaging and robbing, and so.
I
Hobbes
haven't
maybe-
seen the movie, but I've seen clips of people being like, how awkward it might be the next day if you're just like, oh, sorry for killing your wife or something, like, oh. So the premise of the movie's a little odd.
I kind of feel like I ought to give that TV back that I stole, but
it's mine
thanks
now,
though.
so.
All right, so next slide. The people, through the social contract, give a free gift of their rights to the sovereign and contract together to obey him. This is the interesting thing about this. This isn't taken by force. This is the people willingly giving this authority to the dictatorial Leviathan, okay? And finally, Last slide. He didn't like the Catholic Church too much. He referred to it as the kingdom of darkness.
Whoa.
Okay, which I don't
Wait,
think.
I thought he liked authority though.
Yeah,
so
not
confused.
no, but the Catholic Church is talking about virtue and humility and mercy and love and don't steal
Can't have
and
love in his life. All right, understood.
okay, so he was opposed to the Aristotelian virtue-based scholasticism. He didn't like Aquinas. Okay, Aquinas would have been around.
No-go.
All right, so that's Hobbes. Any questions or comments out there? Anybody listening? So we got 2 more to go, and it only gets more
My
interesting.
list keeps adjusting so much, and I don't
Yeah.
really know if I like what I've done or not. Because I keep being like,
Do you
okay,
got these 3 guys ranked?
I'm going, and I'm like, okay, you're over him, but you're under, and then you say something else, and I'm like, well, I don't know anymore.
I know. It's pretty crazy. Forrest got anything else to say, or is
I don't think so.
did
but
we run him off?
Maybe
Okay,
he's
Forrest,
working
if
on
you're
his
still
list.
there. Okay. All right. Next guy, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. All right. You see, he lived in the 18th century, so a little bit later than these other guys. The principal theme of his political philosophy is that the advent of civilization corrupted the natural goodness of human beings. Now, it's really interesting here because he is going to take the exact opposite view of Hobbes about the human person, but he's going to come to the same conclusion in the end. It's really weird. So kind of let's see how this goes. He said, okay, remember Hobbes had the state of nature, right? And that's nasty and brutish and all that. Okay, Rousseau said the noble savage is man who lives a solitary, peaceable existence, concerned merely with the fulfillment of his immediate needs. Okay, so he had a very positive view of human nature. Like people back in the early caveman days were good and honest and pure. But he said, men in a state of nature do not know good or evil, but only their independence. Okay, so he had a very, very different opinion of human nature than Hobbes did. Okay, but the next slide says his book was called The Social Contract. And he said, man, this is the most famous line, man is born free and everywhere he is in chains. Okay, that's the opening line. So what happens, okay, he was opposed to private property, okay? And what he is going to say is that man in his nature is good, but then the institutions like government and church come down upon him, and people start dividing up private property, and that puts strain on this guy, and all of a sudden he's no longer the simple, pure guy that he was, because all these forces are coming down upon him, and it destroys him and it makes him bad, right? So therefore, he argues in the next slide about what he calls the general will. Okay, people must set aside personal interests and act only in the common good. So the people come together and they are not dependent on governments or institutions or a church to tell them what to do, but they collectively decide on their will. Okay, now I like to say this is kind of like Antifa in 2020, where they're like, we have this mindset of, there's oppression, we don't like, fascism, so we're going to get into the streets and we're going to, the general will prevail. And it's almost kind of like a bottom-up type of philosophy. It's very interesting. Next slide. The government should be subordinate to the general will of the people and act in line with their general will. Okay, so this is almost exactly the opposite of Hobbes. Hobbes said, establish a totalitarian, powerful government. Rousseau is saying the exact opposite. He's saying the people are in charge, the general will. Okay, but,
similar to Locke, I guess.
Well, yeah,
As far as
but
that.
Locke wanted to establish a government and have the people,
Choose the
be
people, yeah.
represented in the
Yeah.
government. But Rousseau, I think, is kind of anti-government. He's the more of kind of like mob rule kind of guy.
Okay. So he's not saying the people elect a government. He's saying that the people.
And I don't know, because think about the French Revolution. What happened? The people, the general will welled up and basically overtook the government.
Right.
But then the problem is well, what do you do then? Okay, now you've got the general will. People say like the hippie generation, where they're like kind of like, oh man, peace, love, make love, not war. That was kind of Rousseauian. where it's like, yeah, we can do this, man. We're all going to bond together. We don't need those institutions. We don't need a church. We don't need a government, right? Okay, so the next slide, he says, each of us puts his person and all his power in common under the supreme direction of the general will. Okay, so to understand Rousseau, you have to understand what's the general will. Okay, it's kind of a murky, nebulous kind of thing, And again, all I can compare it to is back in 2020, where it's kind of these people are on the streets and they're, and remember, do you remember when they were would go into like BLM and Antifa would go into like restaurants and say, do you support, us? And people were like, hey, I'm just having my lunch here. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And it's kind of but basically what they're saying is, do you support the general will? I mean, this is the zeitgeist of the age. This is what you're it's political correctness. Is what it is. It's like, are you in or out? Are you not? And if you're out, you're outside the general will. But if you're in, you're in. Okay, but it's mob rule basically, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, because he even said people have a duty to obey the general will of the people. Okay, people are forced to be free. That's his line. Okay, you're forced to be free. That's a paradox, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so his influences, needless to say, major influence on the French Revolution. Which began in 1789, 11 years after his death. Okay, the revolutionaries, big fans of Rousseau and Voltaire.
Oh, wait, hold on. Rousseau is the same guy that Kant influenced, and Rousseau influenced Marx, right?
Rousseau influenced Kant.
Influenced Kant.
Now,
okay.
Kant had one piece of art in his house, and
that's right.
It was a painting of Rousseau.
Oh, okay.
And that's all he had. And remember, Kant was very predictable, and everybody would go set their
his
watches.
Parties were playing down to the second.
Yeah. But one day he was not. This is the famous story of Kant. One day he was late getting to people were setting their clocks by Kant's walks. He was so predictable, and they said I was reading The Social Contract by Rousseau, and I couldn't put it down.
Wow.
So I think it would be more right to say Rousseau influenced Kant. Okay. But they were contemporaries. I mean, I think Kant was Kant lived in the 18th century also. So, okay. So all right, that's Rousseau. Okay. Right. So he, it's all kind of revolutionary. Kind of a bottom up kind of philosophy where the people come together, they create the common will, and then the government really needs to kind of either step aside or just accept it, and everybody else needs to accept it as well. Right. This is political correctness, is really what it is. Okay, we see that in our culture today.
Oh, yeah.
You got to kind of go along. You got to, and I say this tongue in cheek, but everybody's got to be, pro, ABC, LGBT, LMNOP. Okay, so all right, ready for the next one? Better hurry here. Karl Marx. Okay, so founder of Marxism, communism, lived during the Industrial Revolution. Interesting, he lived at a very young age. His father introduced him to Leibniz, Voltaire, and Kant. Okay, I'm sure all of our fathers are doing this when we're like 3 and 4 years old, right? He believed that human beings come to a full realization in the process of transforming the world into their own image through their labor. Okay, his central theme was alienation. He thought people were alienated in capitalist societies. There's some of this. It's interesting because there's some of this stuff about Marx. I'm kind of like, a broken clock is right 2 times a day, right? And you're like, there's some of this that's interesting, but in practice, Marxism has been an absolute disaster.
Right. Yeah.
I think we've seen. Okay, so his whole idea of alienation. He believes like take, and again, obviously Walmart didn't exist in the time of Karl Marx, but take, in his age, there was very little regulation of industry, and you're living in the Industrial Revolution. So you get these poor guys that are going and they're working 16 hours a day, and they're in a factory, and there's capitalists at the top of the chain who are making a lot of money, but you're going in, you're working your 16 hours. You're not invested in your job. It's not your job. You're just working for your small amount of money. And after a while, you might think like, gosh, I'm producing the product, but this other guy is making the profit, right? So in the capitalist society, you get the workers doing a lot of the work, and then the capitalist, bourgeoisie, as he would call it, we're making the money. They're skimming off the top, and he's tapping into this alienation that people feel. Okay, they're not. They don't really care about what they're making because it's not their product. They're just working for a guy, right?
Right.
So somebody, nowadays may, make $12 an hour working at, McDonald's, and they're like, there's some rich guy who's making a lot of money, but I'm doing all the work, and I don't really care. I'm just punching the clock. I could be just as well be working at Wendy's or, Cane's. I'm not invested in this. This isn't mine. I feel alienated. Okay. So that's what Marx was tapping into. And he said the final struggle would be a victory of the proletariat to produce a classless society. He didn't want classes. He thought the division of classes was the problem. He was very influenced by Hegel. Okay, the whole dialectic. Remember we talked about Hegel in a previous show. The next slide. He wanted revolution. Okay, he didn't want peace. He didn't want this to be he wanted conflict. Okay, do you remember Hegel loved war? Hegel thought war was a good thing. Okay, so he said, and this is a quote from the Communist Manifesto, the communists openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling class tremble at a communist revolution. The proletarians, the workers, have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Workers of the world unite. Okay, so he's calling for revolution. He's calling for all these alienated people to rise up against the capitalist society and create a revolution. Okay, the end result would be violent revolution. Okay, so he was not looking for peace. Interestingly, and I kind of sympathize a little bit with this. Marx predicted that advances in technology would lead to increased unemployment and would alienate more people from the means of production.
That's actually kind of interesting.
I like when I go into Walmart and now they have these self-checkout lanes.
Yep.
And you don't even have to deal with a human being. Okay.
Yep.
I go to Panda. This is the only restaurant that I've seen this in.
Panda Express.
Oh my gosh, the drive-through.
I've
seen that too.
They got robots.
They have
now.
a robot now at the
Really?
drive-through. You go and you say what you want. By the way,
You talk to a robot.
awful. It did not work very well. I asked for something very specific, and it's like, you said you wanted this, and I'm like, no, I want this. And it was.
I was so mad.
I haven't been there in forever.
It's not
wow.
good.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And both times I went to Panda, I complained. And in fact, one time I complained to the robot. I said, I want a human being, please. And yeah, it's like, hello, what would you like?
Oh,
and you're
gosh.
like, I'm not talking to a human being. So again, I'm good. We're going to see in the next slide, Marxism has been horrific. Okay, so I'm not defending Marxism, but I think if you take some of the principles of Marxism, the alienation, the fact that like if you own your own company and you're a blacksmith or you're a cobbler or whatever, and you're putting yourself into what you're doing. It's a different mentality than if you're just kind of working for the man, and the guy is saying, I need you to make 10 of these today, and you're making them, and then he's making a lot, you're making a little bit of money, but he's making a lot more, and you're like, wait a second, I'm doing all the work. Okay. So there's some legitimacy to what he says, but the problem is that anytime a government tried to put this into place, it was horrendous.
I think it's interesting because if you go back to Machiavelli, his whole thing was the ends justify the means. It's kind of similar if you go now to the time of Marx in the 19th century, and you see, okay, so the capitalist system isn't great. It's abusive. Everyone's isolated. There's all these bad things going on, and it's similar to Machiavelli, I think, because he's trying to use a particular justification, a certain means to uphold his end, which in practicality just was terrible and didn't work through the 20th century. It's actually very similar when you compare it to the French Revolution. The peasants, they rose up against some aristocrats who were very, because I'm reading A Tale of Two Cities right now, or I just finished it for our literature class. And it's all about the French Revolution, and it's very interesting because during the French Revolution, the peasants rose up against the aristocrats who were being abusive, for sure, to their to the people they ruled under. But the revolution, there wasn't, like, you didn't really change anything after it. You didn't make it any better. In fact, there's an argument to be made, you actually made it worse than when the aristocrats were in power.
Yeah.
Because all it was anarchy and communism and everything else. So it's interesting because, you might have a somewhat decent philosophy to show how bad your situation is, but when you put it in practice, is it actually going to be better than what you had before, or is it going to be worse or the same as what you had before?
Yeah, and I think that's what happened. Yeah, the French Revolution for sure, and a lot of these, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. So, all right. So, last slide. I know there's been a lot of information.
Yeah.
This is a lot of information. Maybe this should have been about 5 shows. But all right. So, last slide. Marx-inspired revolution swept throughout Europe shortly after the Communist Manifesto was published. You had the 1848 revolution in Paris. That would have been earlier because that was while he was still alive. 1917 Bolshevik revolution in Russia. The tyranny of dictators, Lenin and Stalin. An estimated 60 million of their own people were killed. I've searched for the how many people died in the revolution in Russia, and you get a lot. Some will say, 12 million, 80 million, but let's just say there was a lot. Okay. Chinese Communist Revolution resulted in the People's Republic of China in 1949 under dictator Mao Zedong. Thank you. 45 million people killed. Okay, so this continues to be a communist country even today. There's very little freedom. Okay, and we're seeing even the impact on the church. You've got the underground church. You've got Cambodia's Pol Pot, communist dictator, responsible for the death of a quarter of the population between 75 and 79. All right, so you're like, I like this alienation theme. I think it's kind of cool, and I think the proletariats, have a right against the communist and the capitalist leaders. But you're like, okay, we put this into effect. Where has it worked?
Nowhere.
Well, Forrest pointed out that there's the wealth gap in Mexico that led to the Cristero War as well.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, so was that communist influenced, the Cristeros War?
It was a wealth gap. He's just talking about the alienation portion,
Oh,
I guess,
okay.
of it.
So, I'd be interested in knowing, and I'm sure Forrest knows, was what happened in 1920s Mexico, was that Marxist? I don't know, but it sounds like the wealth gap. That's very Marxist.
Similar,
all right. So I've done a lot of talking, and so now it's time as we wrap up. I don't know if Forrest wants to do it. If there's anybody else watching on any of our other platforms that wants to rank these 5, we can go back to the slide.
Are we going from worst to best or best to worst?
Let's do worst to best. Okay.
Wait, number 1 would be worst?
Well, let's say 5 is worst.
Can you sum up really quickly, Dave, while William and I are completing our list, just like the 5 philosophers and sentence about each of them, so that everyone who maybe just tuned in now understands what we're doing.
Okay, so here's the picture, and I have our 2 normal people in the picture. If you want to, I don't know if you want to go back to that, but never mind. Okay, you got Machiavelli, wrote The Prince, and Machiavelli believed that the end justifies the means. The leader just does whatever he needs to do. Don't worry about morals. Don't worry about ethics, because there aren't any. You get results, okay? And as long as you get results, everything's fine. Okay, that's Machiavelli. John Locke was for representative government. He thought that people should select a government, and the people have responsibility towards the government. The government has responsibility towards the people, and if the government becomes tyrannical, the people have a right to overthrow it. And he believed in natural rights, so he swung the pendulum more towards that people have rights, and the government needs to acknowledge that. Okay. And then we went to Thomas Hobbes. He wrote Leviathan. He said people in the natural state were nasty and life was short and brutal and you couldn't trust anybody. That's why we lock our doors at night. And so what we need is an authoritarian leader to keep everybody under control, doing whatever he needs to, if he's got to kill some people to set an example, because the end result is that we're going to have a peaceful society. But the people contract with this guy. This is something that they agree to. Okay, he didn't take over. The people they want it because they want to get out of the natural state of violence. All right, Rousseau, the common will, the general will of the people is what matters. Everybody needs to. We're born free, but we live in chains. And so remember, I compared that to like Antifa and BLM back in the 2020s. And then Karl Marx, okay, alienation leads to the dictatorship of the proletariat. They have to violently overthrow the system, and we need to have a classless society, which ends up in communism, because the people are alienated when they don't have the proper share of the means of production. So that's a quick summary. Did that help?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so I know we're going a little long. So
that's okay. Yeah.
Okay, so William, from worst to best, what are yours?
From worst to best. Okay, I think I'm gonna have to say.
Okay, I want to write these down.
Okay, sure.
See how much similarity we have.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Okay,
too.
and then so William, worst is what?
All right, I have to say Rousseau.
Rousseau. Oh,
Rousseau's.
interesting.
Yep.
Okay, Rousseau's
close second. Marx.
Marx. Okay.
In the middle there, Hobbes.
Okay.
Number 2, Machiavelli. And the best one out of the 5 would be Locke.
Okay.
Well, we got some differences
Oh,
here.
okay.
Okay. All right. So, I wrote those down. Cecil, what is yours?
Okay, so I wrote worst is Machiavelli. 'Cause I thought the whole no morals thing, like it just and justify the mean, that could literally be anything. I thought that was not a great thing.
Now, by the way, and not to change your mind or anything, but I don't know that he would have said like, people don't have any morals.
Sure,
the
but
leaders shouldn't, right?
Yeah,
so
but
he might say, "Oh,
but they're the ones. The leaders could decide that my existence is harming the country. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
just be
it's
like, we need to get rid of Cecil. You know. So I'm like,
You ever heard people like they sometimes would say this about like about Trump? People would say, "Oh, he's so mean. He's so he's insulting people," and they're like, yeah, but I don't want my leader to be. I don't care how moral he is. I want him to get things done, and we need to attack these the liberal institutions. People would say that about Trump.
Oh, I know,
like
yeah.
it's almost like, hey, whatever he needs to do to get us out of this mess we're in, it's okay. That's very Machiavellian.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, makes sense. Still don't agree with it though. So it's not gonna.
Okay, so he's the worst.
He's the worst. Second worst, Marx.
Okay,
It's kind of hard to not put him any higher.
Yeah.
Than that.
Y'all agreed on that. Okay.
Yeah, we did agree on that. I had Rousseau as third. And then I have Hobbes as second, because I think even just a firm leader is kind of better than like some Rousseau just being all like, oh, no leader,
Anarchy, yeah.
And then I had Locke as first as well. So we had that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I figured everybody would probably.
Yeah, I mean,
this,
when you're
this,
comparing some of the other guys
Yeah.
to, not that
Yeah.
Locke's great, but it was.
this is not a lot of good choices here. Okay,
No.
so
Right,
all right.
right.
Did Forrest or anybody else?
He has not yet. But if
Okay.
anyone wants to, please feel free to.
Let's see. All right. Well.
Forrest said, "I'd rather live under St. Louis the Eighth."
Okay. Now the city of St. Louis was named after a French, like king, a Roman emperor, perhaps, and he was like a really good.
Yeah.
In fact,
I think so.
yeah, he was good. But he wasn't the guy that got killed in the French Revolution. That was
King Louis the
16th.
16th,
Yeah, and
yeah.
Marie
Yes,
Antoinette let them eat cake. that whole thing.
What is your order?
Okay, so yeah, funny. I haven't. I did say that. Okay, Locke would certainly be first,
Okay.
and then let's see. I think I would actually put Rousseau worst also, because that whole mob rule thing I think is really scary.
Yeah. It's interesting that none of us think that Marx was last. I thought at least one of you guys would.
And I will say I was going back and forth quite a lot on Marx versus Machiavelli as my last one. But I don't know. I just thought.
Yeah, I think Rousseau is interesting because it influenced it. it influenced Marx for sure. It influenced later philosophers, and yeah, the whole mob rule thing that is pretty
Yeah.
So
terrifying,
you're putting
even more
Rousseau
than
as the
Marx.
worst?
Yeah.
Dave
Yeah,
too?
I'm gonna
Now, all of
agree.
us have a different worst.
Yeah,
which is really fun.
yeah.
No, William had Rousseau's worst.
Oh,
Well, yes, yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I
Oh, that's
did.
right. You did have
Yes.
Rousseau.
Yeah,
My bad.
William
I
had
had it
Rousseau's.
backwards.
See, I have.
That's right. You put
the-
Machiavelli
Yeah,
higher.
yeah.
That's what it was. Okay.
And then let's see. I think I got to put. I don't know. Yeah, I'm kind of conflicted with Hobbes because it would be an orderly society, but you wouldn't have a lot of rights. It wouldn't be mob rule. You'd have rule of one.
Yeah.
Well,
My brain was thinking, what my brain was thinking is how St. Thomas Aquinas says that like a perfect like monarch would be a really ideal situation. You're having someone who like is leading like a father. So in my head, I was thinking like that, like a very strong father figure, but it could also be really, really bad. So
Yeah. So I'm starting to lean almost towards William's list because with Machiavelli, sorry, Cecil, and I think he may have influenced me a little bit. But you ever heard
Wow.
like you ever heard people say like, hey, if I need brain surgery, I don't care what the moral of my brain surgeon is. I just want the best one. You hear people like that's an ends result kind of thing. Or some people used to say, well, say what you will about Hitler, but he kept the trains running on time. Hitler brought the economy back. Which is true. I mean, after the Versailles Treaty, Hitler, the German economy was getting better, right? But he's also sending people off to concentration camps.
Right.
So that's a way of me saying that I might agree. I think I'm going to put Marx second to last.
wait,
and
as in like second worst.
Second worst. Yeah.
We all agreed on that one. That's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
funny.
We got Marx as our runner-up to worst, and I don't know.
It's hard.
Yeah,
Dave, you
I
can't
think
ask
I
a
think
question
I'm.
you're not prepared to answer.
Yeah, I know, but I'm so busy talking. I think in the end, just for the sake of time, I'm gonna. Sorry, Cecil. I think I'm gonna go with William's list.
All right.
She drops her pen every time I say that. No, but see, that means you're unique. You're
Okay,
original.
I'm unique.
You're not like following the
thought it was-
crowd. You're not just conforming to William like
Yeah.
I am, right?
William is a trendsetter, though.
He's very unique. I mean, he's very influential. All right. I thought that was a lot of
That was very
information.
interesting.
Yeah. So if you are watching this after the fact, as probably a lot of you are, go ahead and put in the comments what your order would be if you're still with us. I mean, it's been a long hour, a lot of information, but I've enjoyed it, and I hope you did as well. Thank you for watching. This is Back to the Father, and God willing, we will see you next Friday at the same time as we continue to talk about the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas. Even though we didn't talk much about the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas today, but, it's always in the back of our mind, right? All right. God bless you. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.